Reverend David Chakra has always been a lifelong learner and teacher, delivering messages of inspiration and hope, using God as his primary compass to focus his work. His latest mission and endeavor is called Spirit Equipped Ministries, which is designed to equip and train your spiritual life for success, one small step at a time. He joined me this week to discuss the goals and objectives of his noble mission, to reflect upon his life work, and to take stock on what he still believes he has left to contribute to the world. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. But Reverend, if you're ready, I'll welcome you to the program, and I'm excited to learn all about Spirit Equipped with you this morning. So great to see you again, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, it's my delight to be here, Kevin. It's just a joy to first of all have a chat with you. I always love doing that. But beyond this, it's an opportunity to be able to talk about what I'm doing. And it was a when you invited me to consider this, it was a no-brainer to say yes.
Well,
Thank you very much for having me on board.
yeah, I always like no-brainer podcast
How about that?
opportunities for sure. But Reverend, if I could start you off by asking you about Spirit Equipped, and I know it's designed and equipped to train people to live a better spiritual life one step at a time. So I'm wondering if you could tell me more about the mission of Spirit Equipped.
Well, the goal is to put tools into the hands of people and to give them the resources they need to be able to develop their spiritual life. So this goes way back to when I first started in the ministry. It's hard to say this, but I was ordained in 1983, which is before you were born.
Yeah, about 5 or 6 years before I was born.
Well,
Absolutely, yeah.
anyway, I've been doing this for a long time, and
Yes.
even as I began to do the ministry, I wound up doing something unusual for most local church pastors. Most local church pastors go to a local church and they settle in and they care of their people and they do pastoral care and they preach and so on. But I wound up on a national board even before I wound up being ordained. And it led to opportunities for me to be able to speak in other churches. And what I discovered is that Joe or Jane average Christian are full of goodwill and they're not quite sure how to go about ordering their spiritual lives and their discipline. And there was a funny moment where this all started. And I now can see this as the genesis. I had a roommate who wanted to learn to pray. And I mean, prayer is a basic spiritual discipline that you need to engage in. And here's what had happened. He had read the life of one of the great Protestant reformers who had fundamentally transformed the earth. And this Protestant reformer said that when he was having an ordinary day, he'd pray 2 hours in a day. And when he got busy, he'd pray three. Well, it was Martin Luther, and Martin Luther had been in the monastery. And he married a nun who had been in the monastery. And so both Luther and Katie, who were the founders of the Protestant Reformation, already were living in a culture where people prayed by being trained to pray 3 times, 4 times, 5 times a day. So my friend didn't know that history. He decided that he wanted to be a great influence for God. And so he decided that he would pray 3 hours a day. And he got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And he decided that he would pray until 8 o'clock, and then he'd go about his day after 8 o'clock and have his breakfast and go off and do whatever. So he got up very early in the morning and he knelt beside his bed. His knees were sore after he couldn't figure out what it was what he wanted to pray about. He prayed for every relative, every friend. He even prayed for the scrawny cat in the residence that we were living in. And then he looked at his watch and he discovered that he'd prayed for a maximum total of maybe 7 or 8 minutes. So he motored on through the remainder of that 3 hour window, and he tried again the next day to do 2 hours, and he wasn't able to do that. And then I bumped into him like a week after this thing. And in those days, I had managed to get myself disciplined to pray about half an hour a day. And he said, how do you do that? And I said, well, you do it in small doses. He said, well, what do you mean? So I looked down, I had this brainstorm in my head. I said, well, can you give God 5 minutes a day? And he said, 5 minutes? Is that enough? I said, well, how much are you giving him now? He said, nothing. I said, well, 5 minutes is considerably better than nothing. We both laughed. And here's what he did. I said, okay, now tell me, what's the best time of the day for you to be clear-minded where you have a half an hour free? And so eventually he said, well, 10 o'clock in the morning, because I have classes until 10, and then I don't have another class till noon. And I have time after that, and I'm awake and I'm clear-headed. I said, okay. I said, can you be uninterrupted? He said, well, I can. I said, well, if you decide you want to pray 7 minutes instead of 5, are you able to make sure that you can organize your life to pray the extra 2 minutes? He said, well, I can. I said, all right, have you got a Bible? He said, yeah, I do. I said, well, what book of the Bible are you going to read in case you run out of things to say? He said, well, I'm going to read the Gospel of Luke. I said, okay, so you got the Gospel of Luke. Do you need a devotional book beside you? He said, well, I can find one. And we found one and we put it beside him. And he had an upper room thing, and he had his Bible and he had his routine. And I said, now you need to be able to expand that, because sooner or later, 5 minutes is not going to be enough. He said, I just don't believe that. I tried 3 hours and I did 7 minutes and I was bored out of my ever-loving tree. So here's what he did. He made a commitment to give God 5 minutes a day for the next 30 days, and he made a plan B in case plan A failed, because sometimes the phone rings, sometimes you get called away in an emergency, sometimes somebody shows up with some sort of thing that has to be answered right away, and your 5 minutes gets dashed out of your hands. So he took the commitment to do 5 minutes a day at 5 minutes past 10, and he kept that up for 2 weeks. And then at the end of 2 weeks, he discovered that he was praying 10 minutes a day. And I kept putting resources into his hands to help him take small steps on learning how to do this. He learned about the difference between the prayer of praise and the prayer of supplication and the prayer of thanksgiving. He learned the difference between seeking the Lord in earnest about somebody who was desperately ill versus praying about getting your material possessions supplied and those kinds of things. Anyway, within a month, he was praying about 25, 30 minutes a day and doing so with joy, and discovering that he had to actually cut his prayer time short because he had to go about the rest of his day. What he did was actually what you're anticipating in your second question. He trained instead of just trying. So he gave the Lord 5 minutes a day and made that a regular routine, and the habit became more important than the amount of time he spent. So I'll give you an example. So whenever I get people ask this question, I ask them to fold their hands like they ordinarily do, and I'll just show you on the Zoom screen. So my hands go like this. And then I say to those people, listen, I would like you to make a small change in how you fold your hands. So look at where your thumbs are, and they look at it, and I said, I want you to shift it so that the other thumb is on top of the other thumb. So they do that, and then I say to them, well, tell me, does that feel odd or does it feel ordinary? They said, well, it feels odd. I said, that's because you're doing it for the first time. But if you make a conscious and deliberate effort to do this every single time that you fold your hands, and to do it the way that I just instructed you to, after about 3-4 weeks, you're going to discover that becomes ordinary. You can try to fold your hands like this ordinarily, or you can make an intentional practice of doing that. And if you keep the practice up for X number of weeks, it turns into a habit, and habit becomes your friend. That what's true in ordinary life is also true in spiritual disciplines. You should train them one small step at a time, instead of trying to just do a whole bunch of things all at once. Now, I used to teach music. And what I would do with musical lessons, I taught accordion, and I hope that doesn't disturb you. My ethnic background's Ukrainian, and my father and my mother loved the accordion. And so when I was a child, I learned this. I also learned to play the piano. But when I was teaching music lessons, whether it was piano or whether it was accordion, I would look at my student and I would say this. Tell me, can you put your 5 fingers over top of the middle C and then D, E, F, and G? And they didn't even know where those notes were. And so I showed them, and I said, now I want you to press this one down, followed by this one, this one, this one, and this one. And they would do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'd say to them, go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 now. And they do that. And I said, okay, for this week, I want you to give me 15 minutes a day at such and such a time, and I want you to practice going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You will train the small muscles in your hand to be able to respond to your brain thinking about using those muscles. And after about a week, they were able to do it quickly. I said, okay, now we're going to learn how to move this up and move this down the ladder. And then I'd eventually teach them about how to put their thumb under the finger and so on, so they could do a full scale. It's the same thing with spiritual disciplines. You don't try to become a piano concerto player, but who sits down and simply plays. There are people who have that gift, but they're 1 in 2 million. I mean, that's what happens there. Georgian average, they need to learn small steps at a time, a micro skill on top of another micro skill. So when I wound up traveling across the country and going to various churches, all kinds of well-intentioned Christians who wanted to have a spiritual life, but they didn't know where to begin. So the goal of Spirit Equip is to create resources, audiovisual, print, seminars and events, etc., to teach people in small steps how they can build upon what it is they already know by way of head knowledge into personal practices. That's what it's about. That's what we're going to do.
And tell me, what is the biggest lesson you hope people take away from engaging in the new endeavor that you've sort of created?
Well, the bottom line is Jesus didn't tell us to make Christians. Jesus told us to make disciples. And if you look at what most churches do in contemporary culture, and it doesn't matter what denomination, we're pretty good at telling people about the need to invite people to the presence of Christ. What we're not really good at is giving them the steps to become disciplined in their life. So Jesus taught Peter, James, and John. And if you've read the Bible at all, you'll know that he had a group of people who followed him, but they weren't called followers. They were called disciples. Disciples are people who enter into disciplines. Now, you're not saved by your disciplines. You're saved by the grace of God, but you grow by the practice of disciplines. And I think the biggest takeaway that I would want people to have when they've entered into a course of study with me or use some of the resources we're developing is that when they have completed those particular studies, there'll be people who now have a discipline under their belts that they can practice. So let me tell you about how I learned this. I would go in and do events in churches, and I'd have a topic that I was teaching, whatever the topic happened to be. In fact, you're going to ask me later on about some of the books I've written. One of the books I've written is on the Lord's Prayer and the key words that are found in the Lord's Prayer. So I'd go into a church and I'd teach about the Lord's Prayer, and people get all excited. And isn't this amazing? There are things in the Lord's Prayer we haven't seen before. But then at the end of the seminar, if I didn't put a resource into their hands to teach them how to get at the micro skills, I would have 100 people at the seminar, 7 or 8 would remember 10% of what I taught. If, on the other hand, I would do a seminar on the Lord's Prayer and then place a resource in their hands that would teach them what those key words meant so that they could journal it and practice it and pray it and make it a regular habit and routine over a period of 6 to 8 weeks. If people did the course, they'd retain 85, 90% of what it was that I taught them in the seminar. Now, I have to tell you this, Kevin. When I get excited, I talk too fast.
I know that from personal
people start,
experience. Yeah.
yes, that's just it. they take copious notes, or they turn their recorders on, or whatever it is. Then they'll listen to it over and over and over again. But when I write a book and I put the teaching into 3 or 4 paragraphs, they can go over the reading and the reflecting, and they can record their impressions, and then they can open up the Bible and look at what it is that I've been telling them about. They can look at the paragraph before and the paragraph after, and they can see whether or not what I'm saying is coherent and logical, whether it fits into the center of what Jesus was trying to teach. And they can take their time. And so here's what happens. And when I speak, people get excited about the topic I'm talking about, because I like to tell silly stories and I like to make them laugh. And beyond that, I like to use the story to bring people into the application of the scripture passage. But when I leave the room, there's them and the Bible, and there's their faith in God. They then have to make the decisions they're going to develop what it is that. Now, if I get 2 points in a 3-day seminar that they remember, that's success. But that's not enough success as far as I'm concerned. What they need is resources in their hands to be able to say, okay, I have understood that this principle is important. Now what I need to do is to slow this down so that I can find out where it is in the scripture. I can study it. I can learn it. I can develop it. And I can make it a practice or a habit in my life. And I can be in a context. Actually, what I do is develop individual studies and small group materials. Um, so the greatest takeaway I'd like to be able to say has come as a result of this ministry is that people who are well-intentioned and godly and desire is to grow actually have the tools, the resources in to be able to do so. My goal is not to become the great teacher. My goal is to become an equipper. That's why the name of the ministry is called Spirit Equip. I want people to develop their spiritual disciplines and cause them to grow so that when I'm not in the room, they're just as faithful and they're growing just as much as if I am in the room. The goal is that we would be able to develop in every person so they would have resources in their hands to be able to accomplish the things that are helpful to them. That's the hope.
And I know that you're also the chair of the Alliance Pray team. So could you tell me about that work and the mission that you have in connecting those groups of people as well?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. The Alliance Pray team was formed. I'm a pastor in the Christian Missionary Alliance. Every 2 years, there's something called the General Assembly, and all the pastors and workers from across Earth, as well as in Canada, all gather, and we're all in one place, and we learn from each other, and we grow together, and so on. One of the presidents of the Alliance, a guy named Mark, realized that we train people to pray. He handpicked, there was a moment on the floor of the denomination that we needed to create a volunteer team of people to learn disciplines on how to pray and then develop resources to equip the movement. And so in the course of time, I joined the Alliance. This is before I started, actually. Arnold Cook was the president. He was stepping down from his role when I joined the Alliance in 1998. At any rate, he had this team of people, and in those days it was called the National Prayer Mobilization Team. And their mandate was to create resources to help people to do spiritual disciplines and grow. So, this thing fell to me. I wasn't trying to do it. I joined the Christian and Missionary Alliance. I had a passion for doing this. I had been doing it in a different denominational tradition. I wound up meeting people who were already on that team. And then in the course of time, they said to me, listen, you're obviously doing this. You've written this book called Power of Praying, which is the book on the Lord's Prayer. You've taught this thing on the Lord's Prayer at our General Assembly. Would you take on the leadership of this? And so it's a volunteer group of people from across my denominational tradition who all have a passion to see people grow in their spiritual disciplines. So that has been done as a volunteer. And as a direct result of that, we have done equipping events. And it led to my being able to speak, do conferences in 17 different nations. And so as the chair of Alliance Pray, I was overseeing people who develop resources for our General Assembly to use at Assembly. But we would also create resources that were given away free of charge to people across the movement. In fact, one of the really received anybody who wants to go there. So I don't have there's a podcast if there are we I will resort 50 days of prayer discerning the voice. And you'd go to www.alliancepray.ca. You download that and it's a free resource and you can read that. But actually I have a little jingle that goes with it. Need to pray, don't know the way, alliancepray.ca. So you can go to alliancepray.ca and you can download 50 days of prayer. It's a resource I wrote. But it's the whole point of Alliance. We as a team of volunteers would do everything in our power to equip prayer across Canada. And because the Christian and Missionary Alliance is in 82 nations, rather, Canadian branch in just over 40 of them. Very often I'd find myself traveling. and I'd be in the presence of Alliance workers across the planet, and I would teach them. And so that actually kind of was the birthing place for what I'm currently doing now. In those days, I was a lead pastor of a local church, as I was here in Windsor at Heritage Park Alliance Church. And I would do that as my active service over and above my service to the local church. And so I would find people to fund the trips. I would travel, and I would not charge people overseas to do this. Spirit Equip is now my living. And so now I'm developing resources. And right now at this point, I am trying to, actually, I've just finished 2 manuscripts. I have 1 manuscript on prayer for healing that's going to be published probably in about a month. And I have another manuscript that I'm trying to put in front of a traditional publisher called "Hey, Are You There? It's Me, God!" exclamation mark. How to listen, test, and know when God speaks. So these 2 books are going to be coming out in the very near future. And of course, people will buy them; they'll purchase them. And the goal is that I'll be doing full time what I used to do as an active service. And so my district superintendent has created an income stream for me to be able to start in this ministry. And we've created a website, www.spiritequip.com, for people to be able to receive blogs. I have a YouTube channel called Spirit Equip Ministries, and we offer courses. And right now, because of COVID, we're doing them on Zoom, just like we're doing this interview. And so I've been teaching courses on Tuesday nights on a basis, and Thursday afternoons, and I'm going to be teaching another one on Sunday evenings and Tuesday nights in the new year. But the point is that the goal is to equip, and in the course of time, I'll be developing curriculum and use, and that will create the income stream for me to be able to. That's how it's going to work. So yeah, in fact, you're welcome to, if you have people on board who would like to join that, you can go to spiritequip.com, and it's 2 words. Spirit, the very word we use to describe the Holy Spirit or gifts of the Spirit or whatever, Spirit, and the word equip, spiritequip.com. And you can sign up for courses that we'll be teaching. People can take them. And some of them will be for at a low cost. I'm going to be teaching a course in the new year on spiritual gifts. And then I've got another one that I've been developing. Just had it videoed. I'm going to have to edit that to put it into a quality production, where I'm going to be teaching on how to deal with the powers of darkness. And people are very often are sorely tempted or struggle with how to get victory over this particular sin pattern in their life or the destructive behavior they're involved in. And I offer a seminar on how to help people get victory over those kinds of behaviors and how to deal with unclean spirit beings that are attacking them. So this is what I do.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, Reverend, I think that jingle is a inexpensive way at good marketing. So I commend you on that one.
Well, it's what you have to do in this current culture. In fact, when I started, the original intention was that I would travel a lot. And so just after I began, I was booked in to do 5 conferences outside of this Windsor area. And then, of course, I got one of them done. I traveled to Montreal and I did a conference in Montreal. And I was booked in to do a conference in Michigan. And I was booked in to do a major event for the churches across the Christian Missionary Alliance of Canada with something special that was going to happen in Brampton, Ontario. All those conferences got canceled, right? They all got pushed into. So you know this, everybody and his cousin had to cut back on what it was they were going to do by way of gathering. We couldn't gather in person because that wasn't allowed. And the specials that I was going to be taking part in got delayed or got canceled outright. And so I used the year to write. And I have been developing materials through the year. So that's what I've done over the last several months, and that's what's led to the possibility of me being able to produce 2 new books. I don't know if you ever had to write a book. It's a lot of work.
It's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
No, you have to know your subject, and you have to have a passion for what it is that you're doing.
Absolutely.
And if you don't know your subject, you're going to run out of something to say after 2 chapters. So
well, Reverend, I have to tell you, I don't think you'll run out of things to say, buddy.
Thank you very much. So I did my doctoral work in spiritual discernment practices. And so I have 3 years of research where I poured myself into reading the history of hearing the voice of God in the Catholic stream, in the Protestant stream, in the charismatic stream, how different streams of the Lord's church would pay attention to listening to the voice of the Spirit. And of course, that went into my doctoral studies. Now, here's the problem. You write a doctoral thesis. Joe or Jane Average is not at all interested in reading what the cataphatic prayer tradition is in the Jesuit order. They're not interested in that. But Joe or Jane Average, George Jane Christian, does really sincerely want to know, historically, what have churches done to pay heed to the voice of the Spirit? How do they know when they're being guided? And so I used the last year, and I took the cream of what it was that I studied in the doctoral work, and I turned that into a popular. And so it's ready to go to publisher. In fact, I'm going to have it reviewed next week, and it will go to a publisher early in the new year. And God willing, by March or April, it will be available for people to purchase. And the goal is that this would not be expensive. I don't want resources to be outside the realm of the ordinary person to purchase it. But my thought is that if I can produce a book for about $20, anybody who wants to can then take advantage of 3 or 4 years of deep study that I've been doing to get myself ready to be able to teach on this. And I've turned it into a popular resource. So the center of the resource is focused on a city where someone historically has had an encounter with the power of God. And then I dialogue that with scripture, and then I give them a reflecting and recording section where they can write their own personal reflections on what it is that they have read, followed by 5 days of this. And then we have a group study that'll be used at the end of it. And so the goal is that by the time 6 weeks of study are done with 5 days a week looking at a story and what it is says in the scripture about this, people would be able to talk about their own personal experiences of hearing the voice of God. In fact, this week. And here's what I've discovered. If I tell people about something where I've heard or where someone in church history has heard the voice, and the evidence of it is that it always blesses another person. If you do that, it takes about an hour. And then the people who have been reading their listening will say, when I had such a thing happen to me at such a time, that was actually God. I'd say, yes, it was. And they'll say, oh, well, that's happened to me before. In fact, let me tell you about the number of times. And then it was very interesting. The first part, I wound up talking about how you hear the voice. And by the end of the call, I had 4 couples with me on this. Each of the 4 couples narrated a moment they had an encounter where they became aware of being guided. And they described what it was to be guided. And as they described it to me, was that Jesus? I'd say, yes, yeah, it was. That's how he works. And they'd say, oh, do you mean I can do this? And I'll say, yes, you can do this. And by the way, anybody who has a desire to listen to the voice of the Lord can have that opportunity granted to them. And there are things that are signals to know that the Lord is speaking. So the book is designed to give people the evidence they need, the scripture verses that point to this, and historical vignettes from people who were successful in their Christian walk, describing what it is to hear the voice of Jesus. At any rate, it's going to be published in the new year, and the title will be, Hey, Are You There? It's Me, God, 2 exclamation marks. Then the subtitle is How to Listen, Test, and Know When God Speaks. And the goal is to...
Yeah, fantastic. I want to wish you
Go ahead.
the best of luck with that and all your written endeavors, Reverend. But I'm also curious to know how your experience as the director of the College of Prayer Canada has influenced your work over the course of your career.
Okay, the College of Prayer is a international body of people from all sorts of denominational traditions and backgrounds. They include sacramentalists, evangelicals, and charismatics, and prayer. I myself have to, And there I wound up, I don't know if you know much about Ugandan history. I wound up in Uganda, and I wound up in the town where Ian was born, and where Joseph Kony, that awful warlord, did all kinds of horrible damage to infrastructure and family life. And he created the child soldier thing that led to the decimation of that country. At any rate, after he was defeated by the Ugandan army, the College of Prayer International, of which I'm a presenter, invited churches to consider going into various areas of Ugandan infrastructure after 25, 30 years. And so the congregation I was serving, Spruce Grove Alliance, together with Risen King Alliance Church in New York City, and Lilburn Alliance Church in Atlanta, Georgia. Our three congregations determined that we would help pastors and leaders in those ravaged areas to rebuild their shattered infrastructure. And so I wound up traveling back and forth to Uganda to put resources in the hands of those pastors who had nothing. They had absolutely nothing. So when I met people, and it didn't matter what denominational background, I met Methodists and Presbyterians and Baptists and Pentecostals and Anglicans and Catholics and so on. And they didn't care what kind of Christian you were because they'd been through war together. And when they discovered that there was someone willing to help them, they would gather, and I would meet 750 or 800 or 1,000 pastors who simply wanted to learn basic Christianity, because if you could read, you became a pastor. And that wasn't enough. And so my church in Alberta sent me 4 times to go there. And I wound up teaching those destitute pastors to learn and grow. And that led to various events happening in Canada and the United States as well. And I spoke across Canada, the United States, and into Europe. But I must say, the most memorable was working with the destitute in Central Africa, watching them because they were so hungry and yearning to learn. And it didn't matter what denominational tradition they belonged to. They wanted to know what the Bible said. They wanted to learn spiritual disciplines. They had cried out to God in the middle of desperation because this warlord, Kony, had come through there and shattered the infrastructure. When that guy was thrown out, and that was a great gift that he was, they cried out to recreate order out of chaos. They had to start from scratch to rebuild schools, to rebuild hospitals, to rebuild family life, to rebuild church life, to rebuild every kind of aspect of what it meant to be humans together. And I was privileged to be part of watching their spiritual life be rebuilt. There were other things going on there with NGOs going in to help them get water systems, and NGOs going in to teach them how to farm and so on. And there were partnerships with churches and denominational leaders and so on. The College of Prayer asked me and my congregation to go in and help them rebuild their spiritual life. And what a privilege it was. And so I was assigned to the town of Arua, Uganda. And that was the birthplace of Idi Amin. It was right on the northern tip of Uganda, on the south side of Sudan, next to DR Congo. And so we had people coming from DR Congo. We had people coming from Kenya. We had people coming from Rwanda. And you know what happened in Rwanda. We had people coming in from South Sudan. These were war zones that had been ravaged. And we were able to put resources into their hands and help them learn how to rebuild spiritual communities of faith, even while they were also rebuilding agriculture, as they were also rebuilding education, as they were also rebuilding water systems and health systems and so on. So that was an important and significant shaping event in my life. And I'll tell you something. When a Canadian winds up in trouble, the Canadian can access infrastructure of the social network. When a Ugandan winds up in trouble, they have nothing. They cry out to God for deliverance and help. And they pray far more profoundly and with much more faith than Joe or Jane average Canadian or Joe or Jane average American. Because an American can at least find a way to get themselves to a washroom, or they can find a warm place to sleep for the night. You can't do that when you don't have infrastructure. So the College of Prayer was an international organization. I was the Canadian director. And through that, we taught something called the College of Prayer, which was 8 sessions of teaching And we started by teaching in Canada, but the most important part was the international aspect. And so being part of the College of Prayer led me to teach in different parts of Europe and particularly in Central Africa.
Well, that must have been an empowering experience for you, huh?
Well, to say it was empowering is an understatement. To watch people start to get hope in their eyes again, and to watch them to start to take steps to be able to rebuild what was broken or shattered by 20 years of war. I mean, they were damaged, they were wounded. I saw people where their noses were chopped off or their hands were taken off because of that awful warlord. To see them start to begin to have hope again, that, you're going to do whatever you can to help them. You will. There's no way around that. And so I actually took teams of people from the church I was serving in Alberta at the time, Spruce Grove Alliance Church. I took them with me, sometimes as many as 10 or 12 people at a time. And we would do seminars and workshops, and we'd come alongside them. We helped them with various building projects, and we helped them to actually build teams go, as well as spiritual teams to teach. We had prayer teams, we had teaching teams, and we had build teams. And these three groups of people would go into those communities and work alongside them. We wound up being attached to a Methodist bishop. And this guy had planted, can you get this? He planted 48 churches. He had nothing. And he planted 48 churches. And he would help young people to get shoes on their feet and clothing on their backs. He would teach them about the gospel, and he would put food in their bellies. And he put these two things went side by side. And we partnered with this bishop, and we wound up doing this amazing work in that place. I was very, very thankful for that opportunity to be able to do that. It did. It was because of going to Uganda that I started writing spiritual resources to train them. And the very first people to receive the Power Praying book, the book that I wrote in 2009, were the Ugandans. I actually got those books done and printed in Uganda, and then we gave them away at no charge to the pastors who could manage to get themselves to the event. We would feed them for 3 days and give them a place to sleep. And I taught them for 3 days, and then we put the book in their hands. And after they had done being at the seminar, they would use the book to train their spiritual walk. And so really, it was the College of Prayer that birthed the passion to do an event followed by putting resources into people's hands, which is what Spirit Equip wants to do. So now I'm doing this for my living. Then I was doing this to equip the helpless. And believe it or not, the helpless trained me. It
Well,
was being there that
we all have the opportunity to learn. I always tell people never close your mind off to learning, right?
Yeah, and the ones who teach you are the ones who have nothing. And when they decide that they want a passion for learning and want to enter into that, and you see the joy in their hearts and their minds as they learn, it just rekindles your own faith in your own heart, and you start to grow. Now, I don't want to devalue the education I've received. I have 4 theological degrees, and I learned that because Canadians and Americans built the infrastructure to be able to train me. But you got to know something. When you see passion in someone with nothing, to rise from nothing to a place where they have something, it motivates you to want to grow, and it motivates you to want to be able to reproduce this in others. And that by itself is worth its weight in gold.
Absolutely.
So I've been inspired. Yeah, it is.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask a two-part question to end the interview, Reverend. In terms of all that you've accomplished in your personal and professional life, what do you want your legacy to be as a person, a father, a pastor, just as an overall teacher? And then if people want to get involved in Spirit Equipped, how can they do that?
Well, I'll start with the heritage thing. I want Jesus to say, "Well done, Davey. You did a good job."
That's simple enough, isn't it?
Simple enough. I mean, there are things that I would like to see. I would like to be able to leave behind. I've been mentored by Dr. John White from the university. I've been mentored by Dr. Maxie Dunham, who established the Upper Room Ministry in the United Methodist Church of the States. I've been mentored by Danny Morris in spiritual discernment, and by Dr. Gordon Fee, who was one of the best New Testament scholars on earth. And these people poured into me. They did. I would like to be able to look at the Lord and say, I repaid what you granted me. You allowed me to be mentored by these very, very, very fine leaders. Oh God, would you grant that I might be able to mentor other people and leave behind a legacy of faith, even as they have done. And here's what each of those authors have done. They've left behind resources. They've left behind infrastructure. They've left behind training tools and equipping tools. They've left behind commentaries. They've left behind things that are going to be used for generations to come in their areas of expertise. I would like to be able to do the same. And so we're creating Spirit Equip Ministries to create spiritual equipping tools and resources for people. And I'd like to be able to say to the Lord, thank you for the opportunity. And this is my legacy. Here it is. Now, if people want to get on board with Spirit Equip, it's really simple. Go to the webpage, www.spiritequip.com. And I now do 2 blogs a week. I now do a YouTube video once or twice a week. I'm going to be developing a podcast, and that's going to start in the next couple of weeks. In fact, tonight I'm going to be setting up the infrastructure to make that happen. Go to the Spirit Equip page and go down to the opt-in section and put your email information there. You do that, then you're going to get those blogs sent out to you, and you can subscribe on the YouTube channel, which is Spirit Equip Ministries. Just subscribe, and as soon as one of these videos comes up, boom, you're in. And if you want to make a financial contribution, you just press on the Give button. And this is what will pay me to be able to do my work. Right now, I've got a 3-year window to develop infrastructure to be able to get this done with funders who've made the commitment for that time. And then by that time, after 3 years, they will assume that it's been incubated long enough to be able to stand on its own. And so what I've done this year is develop the webpage and develop the blogging and develop the books and developed the beginnings of seminars that I'm going to be teaching. In fact, so go to the webpage and sign up, and the next thing you know, you'll be able to opt into receiving weekly blogs, bi-weekly blogs on the YouTube channel, and you'll be able to find out what it is that I'm doing. I'm going to be publishing on that. I also, on my Facebook page, I've just found out that what I need to do is to create an author page. I have a personal page, David R. Chotka, and you can go to that personal page, and I use it to develop videos and writing and so on to get people on board with this. But I found out now that I need to put a David Chotka author page. But I also want to develop other writers. I don't want to be the only one. So, of course, when you start, you're doing it on your own. But my goal is not to be the only contributor to Spirit Equip Ministries. I would like to have a team of people who are writing and developing resources and events and so on, and making those freely available at an inexpensive cost so that people can learn and grow. SpiritEquip.com. That's what it is.
Fantastic. And I always say that collaboration brings out the best in all of us, isn't it, Reverend?
Absolutely true. In fact, being on your podcast, as soon as I got the invite to your podcast, I said, okay, it's time. I need to do this too. As a direct result of talking with you, I've taken the step to set this up, and I'm going to start, if I can create the infrastructure tonight, I'm going to find that out tonight. So thank you for doing this. This has been a great gift to me. And you're right, collaboration always does create a crossover effect that produces all kinds of outcomes that you can't even begin to imagine. So thank you for the opportunity.
You're most welcome, and I'm always happy to be a trendsetter, Reverend. It's always great to see you, and I want to wish you the very best of luck in your personal and professional endeavors. And I want to thank you for joining me this morning. It's most appreciated.
Well, it's my joy to do it, and may the peace of Christ be with you too.
Fantastic, Reverend. We're done. That was a consequence.